In 2010, I would have never anticipated that 13 years later, today's seminar would generate an audience as young, or such a mixed audience, especially in a conversation related to BRICS. Esteemed guests, I am Nirmala Gopal, professor in criminology, based at the Howard College campus. Thank you for the opportunity to direct and moderate what promises to be an intellectually stimulating seminar. I'm honored to invite someone who needs very little introduction to us, Ms. Norma Zondo, our Executive Director of Corporate Relations Division, to officially open today's seminar. Let's put our hands together for Ms. Norma Zondo.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, esteemed guests. Professor Nirmala Gopal, our program director and moderator for this seminar. Ambassador Professor Sooklal, who's our guest speaker. And also all the deans that are present and all our staff members that are present this morning. Also greeting all our students who are with us this morning, officials from the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, staff, and also all the guests that are joining us online. And we do apologize for the late start this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, with immense pleasure, I welcome you all to the University of KwaZulu-Natal. This lecture is taking place just 3 weeks before our country hosts the BRICS, the 15th BRICS Summit later this month. We take great pride in hosting the lecture as we believe that universities should be hubs for continuous engagement in national, regional, and global matters. This includes those matters related to changing geopolitics and the many challenges confronting our globe at the moment. At UKZN, we believe academic spaces must serve as sites for robust debates as well as research that generates innovative solutions to challenges that we face in our modern world. That is why, as UKZN, we strive to be more than just a center for learning. We strive to be a dynamic hub of collaboration. To achieve this, we actively seek partnerships, opportunities with institutions from across the globe. Through this, the university also aims to achieve diversity, and through this diversity, we can foster an environment where knowledge is shared and produced. This lecture is happening at a time when our university is increasing its connections with other institutions or in other countries through our sustained internationalization efforts. We try to make sure that we bring in programs for our students and staff that will enable them to interact with their peers all over the world. So we, as we speak, we have a number of agreements with institutions in other countries that allows exchange of students and staff, where especially in the BRICS member states. Many of our graduates have had opportunities and our staff to actually engage at that level throughout the member states. All of this is actually possibly because our countries work closely together, and these opportunities, they benefit us all. It goes without saying that geopolitical, economic, and other challenges directly impact this internationalization's effort. That is why we welcome seminars and lectures on this kind of topics. With these words, I would like to warmly welcome you to UKZN, and also we're excited about the insights, the insightful discussions and ideas we will share during this seminar. So with those few words, I'd like to welcome everyone and and I'm not forgetting the people online, and thank you for joining us. We wish you a pleasant day, and I also want to greet the Deputy Vice Chancellor and the Head of College of Humanities who just joined us. Thank you for joining us again, Professor Mkhize. I'll then hand over to our capable facilitator and moderator, Professor Nimala Gopal, to take us through the processes for this seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zondo. And now that Ms. Zondo has given us the license to enjoy ourselves, I think she deserves another round of applause. So, esteemed guests, although it was not by design that today's event was scheduled to coincide with a very significant calendar month for all South Africans, a month when South African women propel their emancipation, tenacity, capacity as producers of knowledge and producers of any other thing that we require to make life easy. These women paved the way for current great women leaders, one of whom has graced us with her presence today. This visionary, postmodernist woman leader has played and continues to play a pivotal role in the higher education and research space, both nationally and internationally. In addition to being a knowledge disruptor in the higher education and research space, she has shown tremendous dedication to various academic causes, striving to make the world a better place for all. Please help me, esteemed guests, please help me to put our hands together as we welcome Professor Sarah Muswetsa, CEO of the Human Sciences Research Council and interim chairperson of the South African BRICS think tank. Over to you, Professor.
Thanks, Professor Gopal. It is an honor, a privilege to stand here for many reasons, many reasons. First, this is my home. While I'm being welcomed, I take that, Ms. Zondo, that warm welcome. Mine is an easy one. Mine is an easy one. Let me first greet the management of our university, my university, the University of UKZN, the staff present here, the students present here, the robust students present here. I can see a few familiar faces. I can also see a very interesting caps and regalia. It means we are in good company as a BRICS. I want to acknowledge you. I think there were many times the students present here where we were indeed worried that there are students who are not interested, the youth, the young people who are not interested in the study and the understanding of BRICS. So I want to thank you for being here and showing interest in what BRICS stands for, especially now that there are many who would want to wish it away. To all other guests, special guests present here, our family members and other stakeholders, I also want to greet everyone who's joining us online. My name is Sarah Mosweza. I'm the CEO of the Human Sciences Research Council. I'm also, as indicated, the interim chair of the South African BRICS think tank, which is housed at the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences. I can see a number of our current, the NIHS's current students present here and alumni. Today would not have been possible had it not been for the leadership, steadfast, very robust leadership of Professor Sooklal, Ambassador Sooklal. He's been leading us in the BRICS space. He's certainly been leading me in the BRICS space as I've been leading the South African BRICS think tank inside the BRICS think tank. I want to indeed extend my special thank you and gratitude to you, Ambassador, as well as your family present here. As I was talking to your wife, your partner, I said, today I feel less embarrassed and less guilty for always taking you out of your family time. Now that the family is here, I feel slightly better. I know that it has been a very busy year for you, and I know that we've also, I'm sure, created a few nervous moments for you. I'm glad that they are here. I'm glad, Ambassador, that you are here and you're going to grace us with your ideas. Professor Gopal, we've come a long way as the humanities and social sciences, working closely with you. Professor Gopal is chair of one of our BRICS institutes. I want you to know that UKZN is a special space, a university of choice, hashtag a university of choice. It's one of 4 or 5 universities that we've selected as a BRICS family to chair and lead one of our BRICS institutes. The other universities are the University of Pretoria, the University of Westville, the University of Durban, Durban University of Technology. Apologies. I think my history is thin there. DUT, as well as an institute inside Wits University called ASIA. Let me just say a couple of just concluding remarks as I welcome all of you. As I said, we have these institutes whose sole mandate is to create, is to embark on a number of research projects as part of the BRICS family. We met as the BRICS Academic Forum in May in Cape Town, and we agreed that there are a number of urgent, pressing research questions that we must explore. And given that I'm in the university, I also want to take this opportunity to challenge all of you in this room to explore with us these number of big questions. There are questions around exploring what we want to talk about as BRICS currencies, given that our combined GDP as a BRICS family is significant in the global order, and therefore we need to explore possibilities, the pros and cons, as they say, of creating this BRICS currency. I want to urge you to explore with us that question, that possibility. I also want us to, we also agreed that there is now a big discussion, and I'm sure there are some who would in the audience would agree with us that there's something called the expansion of BRICS. There are many of our African brothers and sisters in the continent who want to join BRICS, but we don't know the parameters, and I know that Ambassador Sooklal has been championing those discussions, but it is an area of research for us who are in academia. All of us have been talking about 4IR. We think that as a BRICS think tank, that we need to explore the critical and emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and language processing advancements. I'm hoping that students, as you are writing your essays using ChatGPT, you are double checking and you're making sure that that you know the pitfalls of such intelligence, artificial intelligence, because I'm told, while it's a research area, I'm told that it is artificial, but the part about intelligence, we worry about it. The fourth area of research for us as part of the BRICS family is exploring ways in which we could document our progress over a period of time, and creating our own archival data sets, for example, to understand what progress means for us and not take templates elsewhere that we then want to use in the BRICS that are foreign to us. I think this systematic approach will promote transparency and accountability in reinforcing the BRICS commitments to its own objectives if we measure our own progress, right, using our own templates. Finally, the Sustainable Development Goals. As you know, the pandemic set us back a few years, but it does not mean that the Sustainable Development Goals will not, in the Agenda 2030, will not be met, and it is important that we continue with the research in this area. I want to wish all of us well as we deliberate and we listen to Ambassador Sooklal. Let me conclude by saying that we are privileged to be in the midst of Professor Mkhize, our DVC, who has championed and has supported me personally, but also the establishment of the South African BRICS think tank in his leadership role. It is befitting that we are standing here and he's present with us. Professor Mkhize, we acknowledge you and we appreciate the role and your leadership that you have played in the setting up of the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences, but particularly in supporting the BRICS work in the university, but also where I come from. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Prof has really provoked us into thinking differently, inviting us all to disrupt some spaces that we've been comfortable about. And I think for that, we need to give her another huge round of applause. Come, ladies and gentlemen, we have all that energy. All right, so our main speaker for today. So we had various speakers, and we come now to our main speaker, who doesn't need any introduction, I would think, both amongst the young as well as the older people in our midst, largely because we see him all the time on television, we hear him in the newspaper, we read about him and we read his comments in the newspapers. We've seen him grace really important functions. And but I think it would be remiss of me if I didn't share a few words about our guest speaker today. So, esteemed guests and colleagues, it is indeed with great pleasure and honor that I stand before you today to introduce our guest speaker, Ambassador Professor Anil Sooklal, who is the Ambassador at Large, Asia and BRICS, resident in the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. I think that needs a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. So our ambassador here, this is home to him as well, so we're welcoming him back home. He was, this is his alma mater. He was also an ex-employee of the previous UDW, which is now, of course, the merged UKZN, a visionary leader and inspiration to many of us. When you listen to Ambassador Professor Anil Sooklal, you will hear his enthusiasm, his passion around BRICS. You would also hear his positivity for the sustainability for all of South Africa. His expertise and contributions have not only transformed industries, but has also empowered individuals to achieve greatness especially when he talks about BRICS. Besides his role in the BRICS space, he has an impressive list of accolades and accomplishments. Like I said, he was an ex-employee of UKZN, so he spent almost 2 decades in academia. He has 2 PhDs, ladies and gentlemen. I think that deserves a huge round of applause. So I think it's a beautiful combination of politics as well as academia, and I think that is actually the ingredient that gives him the impetus and the gravitas to speak in the way he does. He has published extensively in his field, and yes, I think I'm standing between you and Ambassador's provocative speech today, so I'm not going to say anything more about Ambassador, except to say thank you so much for being here with us, and I want to thank the family as well for giving Ambassador the support. I think that's very important, that's crucial to have family support. So over to you. Let us hear your wisdom and expertise in what you have to deliver with us.
Good afternoon. You're not asleep already. I hope I'm not going to put you off to sleep. So I have to hear you. Good afternoon. Let me first of all say a big thank you to all of you for giving me your precious time and for inviting me to this platform. Coming to this university, which is now absorbed the university that I was part of, is a great privilege. Even though I joined government some 29 years ago when we became a democracy, it's always such a treat to come and interact with colleagues at the university, academics and students. And coming here is also a bit nostalgic, because we were students during the very difficult days of our struggle. We were not part of this campus. We were part of another campus that rightfully was merged into one institution. But it was those difficult days of struggle that shaped us. I am today what I am because of the institution that shaped me and nourished me and educated me and provided me with the proper set of values to work side by side with all those of us, many of whom sacrificed, some of whom lost their lives, so that we all can enjoy the freedom we enjoy today and sit in this hall where many, many years ago we couldn't even set foot in. And I think we should always remember the great sacrifice made by our leaders and the role of this institution in shaping and molding the kind of leadership that was produced to lead us into our liberation and freedom. So, Ms. Zondo, thank you for having me here this morning. To my dear colleague, Prof. Sarah Motsetswa, who so ably leads the BRICS Think Tank Council since its inception. She has provided leadership and guidance and direction to make it the dynamic forum that it is, including the BRICS Academic Forum. Prof. Nhlanhla Mkhize, thank you for inviting us to your institution. To my good friend, Professor Gopal, thank you for having me here. As I said, I've been fortunate in being nourished by this university, and so have my wife and children. We are all graduates. My wife spent 20 years lecturing at UDW. My 2 daughters, one's got a PhD here and at the business school, and my elder daughter is a graduate of the Mandela School of Medicine. So our entire family has been very grateful to what this institution has done for us. Now, coming specifically to BRICS, I am going to share with you some insights in terms of why BRICS is important, why it's relevant to South Africa, why it's relevant to all of us, and why we should take notice of what is happening within our soil in a matter of 3 weeks' time, when President Ramaphosa will welcome the BRICS leaders and convene the 15th BRICS Summit. Now, I have about 30 minutes, I'm told. My wife always says I talk too much, and I should be careful of time. But I will try to condense what I want to say within 30 minutes so that we have some time for interaction. And I've structured my presentation into 3 focus areas. Firstly, the environment that necessitated the creation of a formation like BRICS. Secondly, the evolution of BRICS over these past 15 years. And thirdly, our chairship and the way forward in terms of how we see BRICS evolving within the current geopolitical space. Now, if you look at the current global order, we are living in a most challenging time, perhaps the most challenging period post the end of the Cold War. And that's precipitated by a number of factors. Of course, the COVID pandemic brought to the fore not the opportunity for the global community to work together, which is what we expected, but we saw just how stratified and selfish the global community is in terms of how they related to the pandemic, especially countries of the global north, where you had vaccine nationalism, vaccine apartheid, vaccine hoarding. The African continent and the global south, we were left to our own means, because this overriding view that the life of people living in the global south is much cheaper and not as treasured as those living in the global north. Now, if you look at the current so-called Western-dominated liberal order that was created post the Second World War, that order still exists today. And yet the world has transformed dramatically from the world of 1945 to the world we currently live in. It's a total different reality. But what do we see? We still see the marginalization of the African continent and the marginalization of the global south. We are still outliers. We are not part of the main table, even though the world has transformed. Now, if you look at what has transpired over these past several decades, you had the creation of the United Nations system. Rightfully so, it was created because we wanted a rules-based international order where every country of the world, small or big, powerful or weak, had an equal say around the table within the General Assembly. We created this body in 1945. We created financial institutions. The Bretton Woods institutions were created, the World Bank and the IMF, towards the end of the Second World War, specifically to address a need of the reconstruction of the global West, because the Second World War devastated Europe more than anyone else. It was a war that started in Europe and drew the whole world into it, and the devastation was caused by those that started the Second World War, as did the First World War. So you created financial institutions to address the challenges in terms of providing finances for the reconstruction, the Marshall Plan and so forth. You then created, a few years later, the General System of Tariffs and Trade, the GATT, which was the forerunner to the World Trade Organization, which transformed in 1995 to the World Trade Organization to facilitate global trade. So you put in place, including the International Court of Justice when the United Nations was founded, you put in place structures to give certainty to a world that is governed by certain rules and regulations by international law. But of course, we were all not party to this. In 1945, when the UN was formed, nearly all of Africa was still under colonial rule. The major part of Latin America and Asia was under colonial rule. When the Bretton Woods institution were formed, there were 27 countries around the table in the city of Bretton Woods in New Hampshire to form this institution, and therefore it's still dominated by the Europeans and the Americans, who were the creators and the architects of this financial architecture. When the GATT was created, again you had a small number of countries coming together to facilitate trade, firstly amongst themselves because they dominated global trade. So this architecture was created by a set group of countries that determined how the world should run in terms of the geopolitical architecture, the security architecture, including the UNSC, the financial architecture, the Bretton Woods World Bank structure, and the global trade architecture through your GATT, World Trade Organization. And over the years, they continued to assert their authority, even though we became independent. And as we gained independence within Africa, and as recently as 1963, we just celebrated the 60th anniversary of the founding of the OAU/AU. At the time of the founding of the OAU, there were only 32 African countries that were sovereign states. That's within our lifetime. Well, at least my lifetime, not your. But in that period, you can see that we had to break out of the yoke of, firstly, slavery, several hundred years of abuse, then colonialism, and then still imperialism that continued to dominate the Western-dominated global architecture. Then in 1975, as a result of the Arab-Israeli war and the financial and economic crisis that resulted, the major economies of the world, your so-called G7, came together, and you created a structure called the G7. In 1975, when it was founded, it was G6. The following year, Canada joined and became the G7. Your G7, which is almost 50 years old, took it upon themselves to determine what is best for the global community. So the global community, despite having a United Nations system, was dominated by what the G7 decided. And in 1997, they decided to bring Russia in. It became a G8. Now, during this time also, as we emerged out of colonialism, became independent states, we slowly started finding our feet. We didn't have the luxury of getting the kind of assistance that Europe got as a result of the Marshall Plan. We didn't have that luxury. The kind of development aid that we got was tied aid. It didn't come without strings. And it was not the kind of aid that allowed us to grow and develop as sovereign independent states to make decisions for ourselves. But what you started seeing is a slow evolution from within the global south and the rise of the global south. China, after the civil war that brought the Communist Party to power in 1949 and the CPC came to power, had a few difficult decades in terms of finding its foot. You had the Cultural Revolution under Mao that devastated the country. And it was only in 1978 under Deng Xiaoping that you had the reform and opening up of China. Post-1978, for the major part of the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, China emerged as the fastest growing global economy, growing at double digits. India took a bit longer. Having gained independence in 1947, it was only in 1991, under the prime ministership of Narasimha Rao and his finance minister, Manmohan Singh, who later was to become prime minister as well, that they took certain measures in terms of liberalizing the economy, and India started growing significantly post the 90 period. Within Brazil, you saw a great deal of difficulties in terms of finding the feet. They had 21 years of military rule from 1964 to 1985, and Brazil was struggling. It was only when they had the first direct presidential elections in 1990 that Brazil started finding their feet. But it took another 5 years. It was Henrique Cardoso who set Brazil on the path of growth. And by the time President Lula took the reins in 2003, Brazil was also pumping as one of the major emerging market economies. And what about the African continent? Having spoken about India, China, and Brazil, within the African continent, of course, we were now free, having overcome apartheid as the last state under the yoke of apartheid, under the yoke of colonialism, imperialism. The African Union, the OAU, could now focus its attention on the economic regeneration and development of the African continent. But in 2000, if you go back and Google, go and look at the front cover of The Economist magazine. The headline was, "Africa, the Lost Continent." Some 11 years later, that very same Economist had a new headline on the cover, "Africa, the Continent of Hope." What changed in that 11 years? South Africa was very much at the forefront of the regeneration of the African continent. President Mbeki, together with President Bouteflika of Algeria and Obasanjo of Nigeria, decided that at the 2000 OAU summit, we must go and engage the G8 about Africa's regeneration. It was Africa that introduced an outreach to the G8, because when we first lobbied the G8, Japan was the chair, I was in charge of our relations with Asia, and I was asked to speak to the Japanese. The Japanese said, no, G8 is a meeting amongst themselves, we don't speak to outsiders. We were the outsiders. But through lobbying, we were invited to the Okinawa summit later in 2008, and the three presidents went there on behalf of the OAU to say that we need your assistance in Africa's development. They said, go back and come to us the following year with a Marshall Plan. That Marshall Plan evolved into what we call NEPAD today. And President Mbeki, Bouteflika, and Obasanjo were the key authors of that. President Wade of Senegal had a parallel plan. You know, sometimes you always have these challenges within our continent. He came out with the Omega Plan. Eventually, they brought him in, made him part of the NEPAD process, and Egypt was also drawn in. So these were the 5 countries that were regarded as the founding countries of what is today the new Partnership of Africa's Development. Then we, of course, here in Durban, in 2002, transformed the OAU into the African Union, and our focus then was on continental development. Later on, we got the template of Agenda 2063. But Africa found its foot and was on a new trajectory. I'm saying all of this because even though Goldman Sachs, the chief economist, Jim O'Neill, is given credit for coining the acronym BRIC in 2000, he was influenced by several World Bank reports of 1999-2000. Following the Asian financial crisis of 1997, you had a rebound and you had robust growth amongst a number of key developing countries in the global south, which included the BRICS countries, as well as several others. Indonesia was also one of those countries on the watch list of the World Bank report. Now, I think the only reason Jim O'Neill didn't include Indonesia into his equation is because Indonesia was going internal turmoil. The presidency, some 20 plus years of President Suharto, was coming to an end. You had an internal uprising. Indonesia was going through a difficult period internally. And therefore, I think Jim O'Neill, when he looked, ignored this country, because in the World Bank report, Indonesia was also cited as one of those emerging market developing countries that were rising. So what you saw is the rise of the global south across the board, across continents. And this brought a new degree of certainty in terms of where the global south was moving. It was President Mbeki that put out the idea in 2000 that we can't always be led by the G7. We need, as the global south, to create our own body. He put out the idea of a G-South. And in 2001, we invited 7 countries for a conference in South Africa that was going to take place in October 2001. I was very much part of that. Our former Deputy Minister, Aziz Pahad, and former Finance Minister were tasked by Cabinet to be part of coordinating this. We were quite well advanced. We invited about 7 or 8 countries, including the BRICS countries, to converge and look at creating a G-South body. Then we had 9/11. And 9/11 disrupted the world dramatically and impacted on the geopolitical, geofinancial, geoeconomic space, and was to change the world in many ways. So this idea fell by the wayside. But we picked it up in 2003 and created IBSA, the India, Brazil, South Africa Trilateral Cooperation. We felt that at least let's move forward with some creation of a block of the global south. And there was a great deal of synergy between the 3 of us, so we created IBSA. We celebrate the 20th anniversary of IBSA this year. But again, that was the brainchild of President Mbeki, President Lula, who was president then, and India, it wasn't Manmohan Singh yet, it was Gujarat. Now, if you look at the emergence of BRICS and why BRICS, despite the fact that we have been calling for reform of the global governance architecture, the United Nations, the way it's run, because what happens today, The United Nations, if you look at the preamble speaks about the equality of all nations and to work in harmony and live in harmony and peace with each other and not repeat the devastation that humanity experienced over the 2 world wars. But we have totally discarded the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. We live in a world that is still dominated by a few hegemons. Following the end of the Cold War, on December 25th, in 1989, in Malta, what is called the Malta Summit, Gorbachev and George H.W. Bush met and formally declared the end of the Cold War. A year later, in 1990, East and West Germany was reunited as one country. And in 1991, Gorbachev resigned and Russia, or at least the USSR, broke up into 15 independent states. The Russian Federation was the largest amongst those. But during the period of the 90s, Russia went through a difficult period. They were trying to reorientate and find their feet, being part of the Soviet Empire and now just the Russian Federation. And Boris Yeltsin, who became president, wasn't the best of leaders. Most of the time you would see Russia wobbling through the decade because Boris Yeltsin was wobbling most of the time, because he was highly inebriated most of the time. It was only when he left, he resigned at the end of 1999, and in May 2000, President Putin took over as president of Russia, that Russia started to find its feet and reassert itself as a major global power. And as I indicated to you, Lula came on the scene around 2003. China had successive presidents, Deng Xiaoping being followed by strong leaders, post-Deng Xiaoping period, right up to the present time when you have President Xi at the reins, India having strong leadership. So in all of these countries, in a very changed Africa, you saw the rise of the global south. And when BRICS convened first informally in 2006 on the margins of the United Nations General Assembly, at the level of foreign ministers, they decided to come together as a group of countries championing the cause, not just of the 4 of them, but of the larger global south, calling for a more equitable global order. Now, why would we have to have such a configuration? Many asked the question, was the BRICS founded as a counterbalance to the G7? Definitely not. BRICS was founded to create a more equitable, more inclusive, more representative global order. So the foreign minister level meeting then transformed into a summit, the first summit in 2009 in Yekaterinburg in Russia. And if you look at the very first summit document, it is very direct that BRICS believes in a multipolar world, a world not dominated by 1 or 2 hegemons. We do not want a unipolar world, nor do we want a bipolar world. What BRICS has been calling for from the very outset is the creation of a multipolar world where all countries of the world, North and South, BRICS is not anti-North, but the North has to work in partnership with us to create a new global architecture. And that is what was the driving force of BRICS. We were not there in 2009, and again when they met in 2010 for the second summit in Brazil, we were not there. But internally within what was the Department of International Relations, there was a discussion. Why is Africa not part of this bloc? Because we could see that this bloc was going to become a powerful bloc because it represented major countries from the global south. And we started then lobbying to say Africa must be part of this bloc. And South Africa, we started lobbying that we must be party to it. And at the end of 2010, as China was getting ready to assume the chairship of BRICS in 2011, we received a phone call, President Zuma received a phone call to say that they would like South Africa to become a member of BRICS. And in 2011, under the chairship presidency of Hu Jintao, who was president of China then, we attended the Sanya Summit in March 2011 and became a full member. Now, why do we want to become a member of the BRICS? Of course, our foreign policy is set on 5 fundamental principles. Firstly, that of advancing our national interest. Secondly, that of advancing the interest of the region and the continent. Thirdly, ensuring that we strengthen South-South cooperation. Fourthly, further solidifying North-South interaction. And fifthly, ensuring that we create a more equitable global governance architecture through the reform of the multilateral system with the UN at the center. Those are the 5 pillars that underpin South Africa's foreign policy. Now, we felt that by becoming part of this bloc, it gives not only South Africa, but the African continent greater gravity and greater voice in terms of calling for a reshaping of the current geopolitical, geofinancial, and economic architecture. And over the past 15 years, this is what BRICS has been championing. We are fortunate now that we are hosting the summit for the 3rd time, having hosted the summit in 2013 in Durban, 2018 in Johannesburg, and once again now 2023. Now, with us hosting the summit, it gives us great leverage and great influence because we determine the agenda. Even though we have consultation, we are a consensus-based organization, to put on the agenda what is of importance. And that is why you would have seen, when we were first hosting, Cabinet took a decision and said, you can't have a BRICS summit in South Africa and not champion Africa's development. So you saw that from 2013, we had a partnership in terms of Africa's development. I'm very often asked the question, do we have a mandate to speak on behalf of Africa? No, we don't. We are a sovereign African state like the other 54 member states of the AU. But in 2012, when we were preparing to go to the New Delhi summit, when India was chairing, the then chairperson of the African Union Commission, Jan Ping, the chairperson of the African Union, Boni Yaya, and the chairperson of NEPAD, the late Prime Minister Meles Zenawi, they signed a letter jointly to President Zuma to say, when you go to the New Delhi summit, make sure that you advance the interest of the African continent. That is there in writing, where the African leadership entrusted South Africa to make sure that as part of the BRICS agenda, Africa's interests are also served. That is why in 2013, when we decided that we want to ensure that as part of our chairship, the African continent must receive focus. So we started the outreach. It was South Africa that started BRICS outreach, which today is an integral part of the BRICS Architecture Summit. We invited the African continent. At that stage, we recognized we couldn't invite the entire African continent, so we used a formula. We invited the political heads of all the regional economic communities, your SADCs, your ECOWAS, COMESA, and so forth, your Maghreb African Union. And the head of the African Union, the political head, as well as the African Union chairperson. They all were here in Durban, and we had the first outreach. In 2018, we went a step further because in 2018, while we were chairing BRICS, we were also chair of SADC. So President Ramaphosa decided to invite the entire SADC leadership. So we invited the entire SADC leadership, and as of 2017, under China's chairship, we initiated what we call the BRICS Plus. That is, we don't only invite from within the region when we are chairing, but we invite from the global south. So in addition to the SADC leaders, we had about 10 global south leaders that came to the 2018 summit. Again, we invited all the political heads of the major global south bodies, like your NAM, your G77 in China, your CARICOM, your Pacific Island Forum, Organization of Islamic Conference, your Gulf Cooperation Council. So you had all of those political heads. So we used our chairship to ensure that we consolidate the BRICS platform in advancing Africa's interest, but also bringing the global south together. And I think it was this inclusiveness of BRICS, that we are not exclusive, that we are inclusive, that we encompass and champion the interests not just of the 5 of us, but the larger global community, especially the developing world, that has proven attractive to the global south. And that is why you will see there is such a large interest in countries wanting to become full BRICS members. Now, last year at the Beijing summit, which was held virtually, the leaders decided that we need to start having a conversation on BRICS expansion. And specifically, they asked that we look at guiding principles, standard criteria, and procedure pertaining to expansion through the Sherpa track. That was what was mandated to the Sherpas in paragraph 73 of the Beijing Declaration of last year. But it was South Africa that was the first beneficiary of expansion, because as I said, it was first BRIC. We were then invited. So the first expansion of BRICS took place in 2011 when we became a member. So in 2018, we put a discussion paper on the table during our chairship to say, given the number of countries that's asking to become full BRICS members, shouldn't we look at expansion? But at the 2018 summit, the BRICS leaders decided that we needed to consolidate further as a grouping, and the time was not ripe for expansion. So expansion didn't take place. So China put it back on the table last year, and when we assumed the chairship in January, we have taken that process forward. We're quite advanced in that process in terms of BRICS expansion. You would have seen the number of reports. To date, 22 countries have formally asked to become full-time members, and informally, almost 20 plus countries have asked to become members. So at the summit this year, there will be some pronouncement on BRICS expansion. We can't avoid expansion. I think that's natural in any organization. If you look at the European Union, when they were formed in 1957, it was 6 countries. Today, the EU 27, it was 28, UK dropped out, it's back to 27. When ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, was formed in 1967, there were 5 founding members. Today, they are 10. They will shortly become 11 with Timor-Leste joining. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, when it was founded, were 5 members. Today, they just admitted Iran. At the summit last month, they are now 10 members. So this is the natural evolution. But we also live in an age of new coalitions and new alliances, some of which make sense, some don't make sense. The strict demarcation between the global and North is now in a gray area. It's very difficult to clearly see what type of global architecture will evolve, largely because of the resistance that is still there by those that sit around the high table and think they have a privileged position. They must continue to guard that high table. Now, just to give you an idea how the world has changed, in 1975, when the G7 was formed, China's economy was $163 billion. The US economy was $1.6 trillion. So China was 10% the size of the US economy. In 2022, the US economy is $25 trillion. China is $18 trillion. There's about 7 or 8% separating that. It was 90% in 75, now it's 7 or 8%. India's economy was not even $1 billion in 1975. In April this year, India overtook France to become the fifth largest global economy, and within the next 5 years, India will be the 3rd largest global economy. Brazil and Russia ranks in the top 10 global economies. So you have no longer your G7 as your major global economies. There are far more powerful global economies from the global south, but yet, who still controls power in the world today? It's those that created this so-called Western liberal order that continue to determine what is in our best interest. But the world is changing dramatically. And President Ramaphosa has taken a very important decision for the outreach this year. Given the large number of countries asking to join BRICS and the large number of countries wanting to be at the BRICS summit, it was very difficult. I know a number of African leaders were calling him and through bilateral saying, we want to be at the summit. So we were planning the proposal we put forward as officials. Let's use the same formula we used in 2013 to invite the political heads of the REC. But President Ramaphosa said, no, we will invite the entire African continent to come and dialogue with BRICS. So that's what we have done. We've invited the entire African continent to be part of the BRICS, Friends of BRICS meeting that will take place the day after the summit with the BRICS leaders. But in addition, initially we invited only the political heads of the global south, the formula we used in the past. But again, we had a large number of countries, just 2 days ago, 2 countries have written asking that they want to be invited to the summit, because we have sent out invitations about a month ago. And now we have invited an additional 20 countries. So in total, 71 countries have been invited. This will be the largest gathering in recent time of countries from the global south coming together to discuss the current global challenges. And there is a great deal of anxiety. What's going to happen at this BRICS summit? Is there going to be expansion? BRICS now, in terms of PPP GDP, you would have seen earlier this year, has surpassed the G7. BRICS account for 31.7% of global GDP. G7 accounts for 30%. And this very same Jim O'Neill, has said that by 2030, BRICS GDP will be closer to 50%. But that may come quite sooner. If we admit new members, we already account for 42% of the global population in its current format, BRICS. We account for 30% of the global mass. We account for over 20% of global manufacturing. And in terms of nominal GDP, it's over 25%. Now you can see the anxiety. This has become a powerful global force that is bringing change to the world. It's forcing change to the world. This change is not coming voluntarily. The BRICS has been the catalyst to bring about this dramatic, what you're going to see is a tectonic change in the global geopolitical architecture, starting with the summit here in South Africa. With expansion, you're going to be accounting for almost 50% of the global population, over 35% of global GDP, and that's going to grow. You are seeing what is happening at the present time. Just this morning on the news, the USA credit rating was downgraded. This morning, it was all over the news. The new development bank, which was created here in Durban, it was in 2013 at the Tukwini summit that the leaders took a decision that we must create our own bank, which became the new development bank in 2016. They put tremendous pressure on us because we raised funds on the Western capital markets as well. Last year, they put pressure on us and made us stop any new lending to Russia, unilateral sanctions. But despite the challenges, and now we have a new dynamic president, former president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, who knows BRICS very well. She was part of the BRICS formation. And she has made it very clear, we will start borrowing from diverse markets, the Middle East, Asia, and not just be dependent on one. The bank also took a decision. Sarah mentioned the issue of BRICS currency. I'll come shortly to that. Chair, you must tell me when to stop. The bank took a decision last year in its new 5-year plan that at least 30% of borrowing will be in local currencies. So we don't have to borrow for our major infrastructure projects, for our energy projects, and the NDB has disbursed about $5.5 billion in terms of loans to us, including in the energy sector to Eskom. We don't have to borrow any more in dollars. We can borrow in rand and pay in rand. And as President Lula said, in April when he went on a state visit to China, who decided that the dollar is God and we all must only trade in the dollar? Who made this decision in this day and age? And yet, if you look at the global trading order today, at one stage, yes, in the 70s and so forth, the USA accounted for, and Europe accounted for over 50% of global manufacturing. Today, the USA's share of global manufacturing is 10%. China has a larger share of global manufacturing, a BRICS country. India's share is rising, Brazil's share is rising, and so are the other global South countries, and so is Africa. Now in Africa also, BRICS has been a catalyst for change, saying that we must trade in our local currencies. We signed an interbank agreement several years ago already to say that we must facilitate trade in local currencies, we can borrow in local currencies, and now we're looking at a payment system that we're not dependent on SWIFT, that wherever we go, we must carry a MasterCard and Visa card. We can dispense with that, create our own payment system. In order to facilitate trade in Africa and expedite inter-African trade, and get from the current 16 or 18% we are to 35% under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. The Afri-Exim Bank has created the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. 8 central banks and 20 commercial banks have already signed up to that. So what it means, We can trade in rands with our counterparts in other parts of Africa, and the other African countries can trade with us in their local currency. We don't have to be trading with each other in the African continent in dollars anymore. And I think this is a major game changer. This is a major game changer. According to the African Union, using this payment system will save Africa $5 billion annually by having our own payment system. Now, just to show you, very often we are accused by our partners, who we still regard as important partners from the global north, that our trade with BRICS and our trade with Asia and Latin America is commodity-based. Yes, that is correct, and we are addressing that in a serious way. But I want to just relate a very short story. You must tell me how many minutes I have. That President Museveni related last week. I don't know if you've seen this, but I suggest you go on YouTube and look at the speech that President Museveni made in Moscow at the Africa-Russia summit. And he used coffee. And he spoke about the continuation of the economic slavery of the African continent. The annual coffee business in 2022 was worth $650 billion. The coffee-producing countries' share of the trade was $25 billion. Africa's share of the coffee trade was $2.5 billion. Uganda sells coffee to Europe for $2.50 a kilo. Germany roasts and processes the coffee and sell it for $40 a kilo. I'm just giving you the story because Uganda of the 2.5 billion accounts for $800 million of the coffee trade. The same can be said about cocoa. Between Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, we produce 60% of global cocoa. And if you add Nigeria and Cameroon to that, it's over 70% of global cocoa. Go and look at who are the largest producer of chocolate in the world today. Is there any African country there? Is there any Asian country there? This no one speaks about, but you point fingers that we're only selling coal and iron ore and steel to our partners in the global south. But they don't speak of this kind of economic slavery that we are a party to, and this is what we're trying to change in the African continent in partnership with our BRICS partners to say, yes, you must change your trading pattern. President Mbeki was very blunt. I remember being in Parliament some time back, 2001, 2002. The Chinese ambassador was sitting in the gallery, and President Mbeki was saying, we don't want China to come behave as a colonial power in Africa. We want a different story with you. Ambassador was very aggrieved. I told him, no. President Mbeki speaks truth to power. So you must listen what he's saying, because there's a lesson for you there as we evolve this relationship with Africa. And we're saying the same to our BRICS partners. When we call them here to Africa and we create this platform for them to interact, it's about changing the dynamic in terms of the partnership we have. Because you must remember, the solidarity we had came soon after a few of the African and Asian countries got independence. The first Solidarity Conference, the Bandung Conference, the Asia-Africa Conference, took place in 1955, where some of our major leaders like Kwame Nkrumah and others were in partnership with the newly independent Asian states and African states. So the template for cooperation between the Global South goes back to Bandung. And the ANC was there. We were not in government, but Moses Kotane and Molvi Kachalia went there to champion our liberation and our cause. They met with all the delegations, including Chao En-lai, who led the Chinese delegation, and all of the others, to say that you must support our struggle. And they did. The Bandung Declaration was very firm in supporting South Africa's struggle. So we have this solidarity, and we have an opportunity using BRICS as a catalyst to change this whole equation in terms of the global geopolitical architecture, in terms of finance. It doesn't have to be that the dollar is God anymore. If you look at current global trade, over 50% of global trade is still invoiced in US dollars, but they account for 10% of trade, as I said. We have to change that equation. And this new destiny lies in our hands. as the architects of a new global order, with the global south, with Africa being at the forefront and BRICS playing a catalytic role. Thank you for listening to me.
Wow, I think that deserves a standing ovation, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests. Can we stand and give our ambassador another huge round of applause? So we have in our midst a mobile library, and that's you, Ambassador. You know, Ambassador amazes me with his recall of events and dates and places, and I remember mentioning this to him at one of the previous discussions that we had. Thank you so much once again. You know, I was really, gracious with you in terms of time, because it's not often that we're going to be graced by the presence of the ambassador. We're not sure when we'll be able to get you again. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to open the floor for questions and answers. I've noted one. Okay, we're going to take it in this order. That's 1, 2, and let's do 3 first so that we have some kind of system, and then I'll go to the next round, okay? You can keep your hand suspended so that immediately you raise it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. I'm very grateful to be part of your presentations. I've watched you on TV and I've watched your speaking in YouTube. And my name is Dr. Sunday Israel Bamiji. I'm a postdoctoral fellowship student, postdoc fellow in the School of Built Environment and Development Studies. Previously, I was a lecturer at the School of Social Sciences, and I have to tell you, I have my PhD in international relations. So you understand that everything you've said, I do understand it very well. For almost 23 years, I've been scholar of international relations. And I want to say that your presentation today is very insightful, knowledgeable, and of course, more history, and for where you start from. I have 2 questions though, sir. And the reason I told you I am a scholar of international relations, so you understand the question I want to ask you. And it's based on the fact that on the 6th of June, I was invited to University of Witwatersrand, WIT, to present on this same topic, BRICS, was to consider the constraints and challenges South Africa is likely to face with the expansion of BRICS. And they posed to me a question, and I also want to pose another one to you today. And for the fact that most of the question I will have, that was the query or the doubt that I have, you have been able to deal with them while you are making your presentation. However, this is the beauty of scholarship when you have brought it to university. Like in 1919, when a French general, Jacques Clemenceau, said that war is too important matter to discuss than to live with the general alone, and therefore the inclusion of the scholars, and you have come to us, so we need to engage you as well. So, last year I wrote a book on Russian war in Ukraine, and when you look at the calculation of Russia, that after 1 month the war will just be over. But unfortunately, the war still drags in now. And what you look at, what you consider is that why the Russian war still lingers till now, it's not because the war between Russia and Ukraine, but in actual fact, it's not become the two sides, the BRICS and the Western world. Okay, so I want to ask, thank you for saying that fact that the BRICS is going to be, not only bilateral but multilateral.
My apologies. Can we get to the 2 questions?
Yes, I want
please?
to ask that now. I want to ask, would BRICS and the expansion would not lead to what has happened in the time of Cold War? You know what I mean? Where there's no war and there was no peace in the international system, whereby we live in the ideology antagonism, brickmanship, and many other things. That's the first question. Second question is this, sir. You mentioned also that some people are not happy with the BRICS, the Western world especially, and the American ambassador has equally raised an alarm that South Africa is secretly supporting Russia in this war in Ukraine. That's why I first made that important question to you. And that I was in Stellenbosch last month. We mentioned Port of James something in Stellenbosch, that they were secretly supporting, giving arms to Russia. And because of this, also ICC has also issued a warrant of arrest.
I'm so sorry, Speaker, but we're not going to have an opportunity
sorry.
for the others.
Sorry,
sorry.
sir. The question is, what is going to happen with the pronouncement of ICC with South Africa to arrest Putin if he comes for this summit?
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, Ambassador, do you mind if we take the other two? Sure. The second, thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Nelly Sombuyazi. I'm a master's candidate here at UKZN School of Law. Thank you so much for the valuable insights. It's always a privilege when we have people such as the ambassador to really take us through the history, especially us 2Ks, you know. And we thank you so much for telling us or making reference to YouTube. As most people know as 2Ks, we often don't read as much, but with YouTube, we're able to gather a lot of information. So I have two questions, to make it short. I have two questions. The first question is, over the past couple of days, we have seen the rise of the leader in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré, and the announcement or the proclamation that they are no longer going to be supplying France as well as the US with uranium. And it's not just Burkina Faso, it's also Niger and Mali. So with that situation, how does BRICS navigate through it when there are certain states who want to become part of BRICS but have this very antagonistic relationship with the West? How do we navigate that, especially when you look at the South African economy where we do have corporates and other global and other business entities that are founded from this Western bloc? Now, my second question, my colleague, it links to his second question as well. It is the issue of South Africa and being part of the Rome Statute. As much as it has been avoided now because President Putin is no longer coming, it is now the foreign minister, Mr. Lavrov, that is coming on behalf of Russia. But it also speaks to how do we navigate the history where South Africa has been signatories to most of these global institutions that are run by the global North. Because now we have seen that an institution, the ICC, has now been used as a weapon to cause a drift between Russia and South Africa. And that drift has been saved through diplomatic talks between Russia and South Africa, with now President Putin no longer coming. But what does that say about us as South Africa in BRICS? Are we a trusted ally when we allow these institutions to put a drift between us and our other fellow allies in BRICS? Thank you.
Thank you very much for those really provocative questions. We'll take the third speaker and then we'll allow Ambassador to give his responses.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon to the speaker and to the moderator. Thank you so much for your time. You did say that this upcoming summit is very important. I just want to ask two very quick questions. Firstly, what role does South Africa play in the BRICS bloc, and how can we leverage that in order to benefit the country and the youth? And the second question is, how does BRICS plan to assist the process of the Africa Free Trade Agreement with regards to African countries and how they trade? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's over to you, Ambassador. Oh, yes, sure.
No, thank you for those very insightful questions. Let me first say the Russia-Ukraine war, that's a US proxy war that's being fought there. Let me go back to the end of the Cold War. You had, why did they create the Warsaw Pact, and why did they create NATO? Because you had a polarized world divided by the Iron Curtain. When you had this rapprochement between Gorbachev and George H.W. Bush that I spoke of, bringing the Cold War to an end, the Warsaw Pact was dismantled, which was an Eastern Bloc security pact. NATO was not dismantled. Why do you need a North Atlantic Treaty Organization today that continues to expand? Who's the enemy? In the era of the Cold War, yes, you were divided, the world was divided into two camps. So each one positioned against the other, Warsaw Pact, NATO. Why the need for NATO? And all the agreements that were given by Bush and the West to the Russians have been violated, creeping more and more. Now let's come to who is fueling this war and who is trying to make peace. President Ramaphosa, together with 6 other African heads of state, very symbolic and a very important moment in Africa's history, when the future of Africa's history is being written. It's the first time, always you get outside European powers or the US coming to mediate in African continent's conflict. For the first time, African leaders are going to Europe to solve their problem, because this war is a European war. It's not our war. We didn't create this, but we are suffering as a result of it. The repercussions is quite severe on the continent. But African leaders are going and speaking to European leaders to make peace. And that's a very important turning point also in the history of global security relations. Who's talking peace and who's fueling the war by pumping billions of dollars of weapons and ammunition into this conflict? African leaders are trying to bring about peace. President Xi has put forward a 12-point peace plan. President Lula has spoken to both sides proposing a peace plan. Prime Minister Modi has put forward some peace proposals. All of the BRICS leaders. There is no evidence, even with Lady R and the accusations against South Africa, there is no tangible evidence that any one of the BRICS countries, South Africa included, is feeding weapons into that. This is all hearsay. But there is clear evidence to the global community that the West is pumping billions of dollars of weapons into that conflict. And the conflict is raging. So who is talking peace and who is talking war? And sometimes we don't pause to reflect on the reality of what is going on within the Russia-Ukraine situation. It's not just about Russia, Ukraine. And I think the ICC warrant and the timing of the warrant, we send out letters of invitation to all the BRICS leaders in February. In March, you get a warrant being put out. Now, of course, this has posed a challenge to us in the past when President Bashir was here for the AU summit. There was an ICC warrant, and we were hauled before the ICC to made accountable. Now, I think Cabinet is seized with this matter because this thing will not go away. This warrant will still be there. This is a long war. You're not going to see peace anytime soon. In 2025, we chair G20. Russia is part of G20. Putin is going to be invited. We're going to have a similar situation. Now, when we became party to the Rome Statute in 2002, what we did is domesticated the Rome Statute. So it became superior to domestic law. And I think this is the discussion within Cabinet on how do we go back to Parliament and ensure that, in a sense, part of our sovereignty is compromised by looking at this and making sure we deal with this effectively. Of course, it's well known the ICC is selective. The war crimes in Afghanistan, in Iraq, the US threatened that if you dare bring any case against our judges, all of you sitting in the ICC, they threatened them. They threatened them. So, and this is what I'm saying that BRICS is talking against. The hegemons of the world don't have a place in the world anymore. nor do they have the power and might to tell us, sit down and we must sit down and fold our arms. Those days are gone. Those days are gone. Now, coming to how to navigate countries that have fraught relations with the West and we have good relations. President of Cuba, President of Iran are coming to the summit. They're invited. We have an independent foreign policy. It sometimes comes at a cost. That's why President Mandela told President Clinton, don't give us peanuts and expect us to be happy. And that's the strength of South Africa. We have an independent, sovereign foreign policy, and that is why so much of pressure is placed on us. You know, when the Russia-Ukraine situation broke out right up to the present time, there's tremendous pressure on South Africa. Not on any other African country. They don't care what Senegal is saying about the conflict. Not even Nigeria, what is the position of Nigeria. But the position that South Africa takes, because they still see us as the champion and leader of this continent. And what South Africa says has global influence and global impact. And that's why the pressure on South Africa to make us change position. And we have stood steadfast. They have threatened us with all kinds of taking away AGOA privileges and other privileges, trade. I mean, even, you know, what pains me is to see how fickle our business community is. They say capital is a coward. Capital runs first into a country when there's opportunity. When there's a problem, capital is the first to run. And some of our business community is behaving that way. When you're locked in a trade relationship, it's not a one-way thing. All of those 500-600 US companies and the thousands of European companies that are here, they're making money from South Africa. They're making money from the continent. Do you think they're going to run away? To give you a typical example of all the sanctions, and this is statistics from the International Energy Agency. From January 1st to 16th of June, the largest purchaser of fossil fuels, mainly gas and oil from Russia, is China, 30.5 billion. That's just the first 6 months. The second largest purchaser of fossil fuels from Russia is the European Union, 18.5 billion. And they say they've got sanctions against Russia. Third largest purchaser is India, 15.5 billion. But that 15.5 billion, the majority of which is sold to the European Union. India is buying cheap Russian oil, processing it and selling to the European Union. This is the hypocrisy of the world that we live in today. So you say sanctions, but sanctions are selective. Just yesterday on Sky News, 5 British companies have totally disregarded unilateral sanctions and doing roaring business with Russia. But our business community gets saying, supporting Russia. We're not supporting Russia. We're standing for a principle based on our foreign policy. And we want to see peace in that situation, not supporting one side against the other. And if we buckle under pressure now and change our foreign policy position, then forget about the independence and sovereignty of South Africa. We are then a bot nation. And we have never done it in 30 years. Despite the pain and the pressure that has been put on South Africa, we will never do it. Because we are a proud nation who fought for our freedom. Our freedom didn't come cheaply. And that's why we will stand and fight this onslaught against us even. I've spoken of the Rome Statute. It's selectively applied. Most of the cases that are brought to the ICC are on the African continent. Where do you see Western countries? Very seldom you see such cases. Now, the benefits to South Africa of being part of BRICS, I think I've spoken on this in terms of being part of the bank. We have 20 ministerial working groups. We have a very dynamic science, technology, and innovation working group. Sarah knows the details. The opportunities that are there for us, the agriculture sector, the health sector. Last year, we launched the Joint Vaccine Research and Development Center, an initiative of South Africa in 2018, when we chaired. We put forward, no pandemic then, it was very foresighted. This is a virtual center, but working fantastically. Now, what we are doing in terms of bringing the African Continental Free Trade Agreement to the fore. We're going to be looking at setting up through the BRICS Women's Business Alliance, a BRICS Africa Women's Business Alliance platform to facilitate trade between BRICS countries, women entrepreneurs, small businesses, and African countries. So that's one of the practical outcomes that we will see. The WBA conference is being held here in Durban on the 19th and 20th at the ICC. You'll have well over 1,000 plus delegates from about 18 countries, 15 from, about 15 from Africa. So this is the kind of practical benefits that we are providing. One of the things of being part of BRICS, the fact that leaders, of course, COVID prevented this, but on average, BRICS leaders met at least 2 to 3 times a year. At the summit, on the margins of the G20, and any other major meetings. So there's a very good comradeship and friendship and trust between President Ramaphosa and President Xi, Modi, now Lula is back, that you see that they have a very good chemistry between them. And when you have that kind of chemistry between the leaders, it facilitates and makes easy the relationship in terms of strengthening that relationship, the trade relationship. As I said, we're a country of 60 million, India 1.4 billion, China 1.4 million. These are massive, massive markets. And yesterday, Premier held a roadshow at the Coastland Musgrave. And we were speaking there, it was mainly business people that were present. We are not taking advantage of the opportunities these markets present to ourselves. We are very slow in the uptake, but there's tremendous opportunities. As students, we have fantastic student exchange programs. We have academic exchange programs. We're in touch with so many think tanks, universities. Prof. Motsetsa is here, she will share some of this with you. And the opportunities that it provides us, because growth is in Africa and Asia. At the spring meeting of the World Bank, IMF, despite the slow growth of the global economy, 70% of growth this year will be powered by growth in Asia, through China growing at about 6%, India at about 6.5%. And a number of African countries have recovered from the post-COVID period, and some are growing, about 9 or 10 of them are growing at double digit this year. So Africa is the last frontier of development. And the opportunities that exist for us within the continent, within this partnership with the Global South, is tremendous. But we need to be a bit more aggressive in the opportunities that presents itself across the board. And I must tell you, having been on this file for a long time, there are tremendous opportunities at every level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I'll now take the next round of questions. I'm identifying 1, 2, let's go. We're doing the second phase there, okay? So it's 1, 2, 3, and we'll come back to you, okay?
Sanbonan, my name is Nkosina Zulu. Sesifike kwa undergrad ke manje. I'm not doing all masters or a PhD. In a comment, A1, and then also a question. But first, I want to state we are very happy with this program, and this is our program. We love such programs and we'll protect them. So even the security officers who were paranoid on behalf of the university and tried to stop us from entering here, don't worry. When we come here, we want this place to continue happening. This is the kind of stuff that we love, BRICS. I've already started on my time. I want to first make my first point is on the countries within the BRICS, all the 5 countries, already it's between Russia, India, and China. You already have 3 countries within the BRICS, which all 3 of them have border disputes. India with China, and everyone knows what's happening in Russia. But still, these countries, I'm sure if you found $4 million in your mattress, you'd rather invest it in Russia or India or China, despite them having any border issues, rather than to not do it. But in Africa, we have a problem whereby if a group of soldiers decide to they have access and the ability to go and arrest the president and they take over a country, then within a week, you have several countries threatening military action against each other within a week of this thing happening. So definitely no one is taking their money to those countries. No one is investing in any business there. Whilst we can have a country in war, but their people are still eating, hospitals are still working, cars are operating on the road. Now, I'm more interested because this is not talked much about in the public arena. We know China has a non-interference policy, and Russia, they do have a company which they've recognized as theirs, which has been intervening and assisting some African countries, as they say, who need assistance. Now, BRICS as a whole, as a collective organization, since we have this contrast, especially between the two sort of powers within BRICS, does BRICS have a position, and what is its position on the issue that we have in Africa of these military coups? Like it's already been mentioned, which we have this problem, and is the approach to allow individual countries like your South Africa, your China, your India, and others to decide how they approach the issue? Or maybe is BRICS still working towards formulating a position there on how to address that issue? Thank you.
Ngiyabonga kakhulu igama Sithembiso Thethwayo. Fortunately, I have one question. I greet you all, and this question forces me to acknowledge the presence of the Secretary General of Students here, Nosipho Manzini, and her leadership collective, including the Student Support Services Officer, in the executive structure, Comrade Ntobeko Ndlovu. I won't finish them, but there's also chairperson of the campus, Comrade James Shangi, who's leading this campus. I'm saying this question forces me to acknowledge them because these are the young people. If you see on social media that in KZN or in South Africa, young people are saying President Putin is welcome in South Africa. These are the young people who have been championing those programs. It is this SRC of UKZN who have been running campaigns to say Putin must come physically in South Africa. So my question is that, how is BRICS planning to assist the struggle that we're facing? I'm one of the victims of financial exclusion. So I've spent time in my community. I can tell you now that people in the community don't understand what is happening. We try to explain, of course. Fortunately, of course, through the process, we have learned how to explain in their own language, but they don't understand. So these programs become some elitist arrangement. Not to say it's planned, but I'm only putting it to the organizers that we must reach out. Why I'm saying so? I'm saying so because, like in my community, I'm one of those young people who are entitled to develop that ocean that we have there, where oil and gas mining is coming. And infiltrators who come there, future is that those young people are not protected. If their hope and their only hope is this BRICS cooperation. So now how is BRICS planning to assist those young people down there in cooperation with these student leaders, because these are scholars, postgraduates? How can BRICS become a catalyst to reconcile intellectuals with our communities? Therefore, ideas with practicality. Because as I stand here, I have access to land, hectares of land, mountains with history. Fortunately, where I come from, that is where God of Fertility is. We every year, June, our parents go there. Program of Numkubuan. It's an international event that doesn't benefit people in that community because they don't know. They did not have access to these corridors of information. Even some of us who are inspired to go and learn so that we improve the situation, we face these problems. So how can you assist ukuthi nibe catalyst to reconcile intellectuals with our communities, therefore ideas would practical it, so that as I stand here, even when I'm financially excluded, but I'm concluding, thank you, I'm concluding. So that even when I'm here, or even when I'm financially excluded, but hectares of land in that community, the ocean, the food under the sea, the crayfish projects, sea mussels, the sport on top of the sea, the tourism, property development that is possible, and yonke le agriculture there, which is stagnant because kuna leya gap there. Can you assist us break that wall so that intellectuals can form part and relate? Because seemingly they are not being taught wherever they study. They are not being taught how to relate with these mineral and natural resources, even if they are entitled, even if they have the right.
All right, comrade,
Thank you.
I'm going to respectfully ask you to, thank you very much. Please go ahead.
No, greetings to all comrades, scholars and intellectuals. My name is Duduzo Mselego. I only have 2 questions that I want to ask. So one of the objectives of BRICS is to create a strong foreign currency. Obviously, that will be able to weaken the dollar, which is called de-dollarization. So, Speaker, the guest speaker, I want to ask, do you think that BRICS has the capacity to create a strong currency that will weaken the dollar? Do you think that it has now reached the capacity of creating a foreign currency that would also enable other stakeholders to trade? And then, obviously, we are cognizant of the fact that Putin will not be attending the BRICS summit that will be held this month. It was the Prime Minister, Sergey Lavrov. I am of the view that it is a coward decision by the government, of the head of state of South Africa, because one of the reasons is that, the government fears that should Putin attend the summit, South Africa will be dismantled from the AGOA summit, which is part of the US, which helps South Africa in terms of food security. So I am saying that now we have to come at a time whereby we actually are able to take one decision. Do we support BRICS, or do we continue to, play hands with the imperialist West? Thank you very much.
Please allow me to, may I allow you to please respond? Thank you.
Maybe let me start with the last question on the decision of Putin not to attend the summit physically. He will participate virtually, live in all of the sessions. Now, I did mention to you BRICS is a consensus-based organization. The challenge that faced South Africa after the arrest warrant was a real challenge. It wasn't just about the ICC. I think we just see this as an arrest warrant against Putin and the dilemma it creates for South Africa. It's larger than that. It's also directed at the BRICS as a whole. And as I said, BRICS is a rising tide. And how do you try to derail this juggernaut that's moving at a speed and that's going to come and impact on all of you that don't want to make space for this? Now, over the past several months, President appointed a presidential committee under Deputy President Mashatile, assisted by cabinet ministers, to look at the options open to us. And during this time, a whole lot of other pressure was being put on us, falsely accused of supplying weapons to Russia and holding military exercises. That was a normal pre-arranged military exercise. The joint naval exercise that was hosted here on the coast of Richards Bay between South Africa, Russia, and China, Operation Mosi, this was already scheduled to happen. It wasn't the first, it was the second edition. We have military exercises with partners throughout the world, including Western countries. But they chose specifically to pick on this because of the Russia-Ukraine situation and used that as a pressure tactic against South Africa. They use AGOA as a pressure tactic against South Africa. Investments, companies that are going to be hurt by secondary sanctions that are applied to companies doing business with Russia. And this is not just with Russia. The same is happening with China as part of the containment policy. So President has spoken to all of the leaders because President Putin's non-attendance of the summit impacts on the whole summit. So we had to have a collective decision. And 2 weeks ago, we addressed the Press Association of South Africa. And there I pointed out, it was Putin who then decided that he will not come physically, understanding the difficulty that it will place South Africa in and the difficulty it will put the entire summit in. And I said this was a mature decision, and that's the level of maturity that you have amongst the BRICS leaders, that there could be consultation. All of them discussed this and all felt this was the best solution going forward. So I think it was not an easy decision. It's a complex situation that impacts directly on South Africa and impacts directly on BRICS. And of course, you have cohesion in BRICS. You have BRICS as a major global force, and you'd want to derail that. You want to weaken that. And where do you see the weak link? You put out this arrest warrant by the ICC. And all the countries that are making the biggest noise about this are not party to the Rome Statute. The USA is not party to the Rome Statute, but no one says anything about it. So these are some of the challenges that South Africa faced, and I think ultimately it was a decision that was taken as a collective that is in the best interest of South Africa, the best interest of Russia, and the best interest of the BRICS countries as a collective. Now, in terms of military coups, look, we have to appreciate the gains we have made as a continent. You have the African Union and you have the various structures of the African Union, including the Peace and Security Council. And the African Union has the red card and yellow card system. When you have military coups or unconstitutional changes of the elected government, you are immediately red carded. Now, of course, Africa is not a continent free of outside interference. You still have the major powers interfering within the continent. And many of these, not to take away blame from ourselves as Africans, we create some of these problems ourselves. But there's a great deal of manipulation because the outside forces have a great interest. Remember, in terms of natural resources, this is your richest continent. In terms of rare earths and new resources, point was made just now of trade being stopped in uranium. The same in terms of cobalt, in terms of magnesium, and so forth, that is required now in terms of electric vehicles and so forth. Africa has the largest reserves of these. And fortunately, African leaders are now saying, you don't just come and take our raw material. Elon Musk went to India, massive market, he wants to export electric vehicles. Modi told him, no, you come and manufacture the vehicles, in India. You're not going to export your vehicles to us. We won't buy it. We won't allow it. Now, African leaders are starting to do the same. And for a Museveni to go on a global stage and for President Ramaphosa to go to the recent Paris New Finance, Development Finance Conference and to say, we are tired of being treated as beggars and second-class citizens. 20 years ago, we would never seen an African leader go to Paris and tell the Europeans directly on the face, don't treat Africa as beggars. We are not beggars. That's the new Africa, the new confidence. And that's, I think, the positive. The major part of Africa, we are moving in the right direction. I've visited many African countries. I was in Rwanda 2 months ago. And the progress that you see in Rwanda from where they were not long ago with the genocide and what Rwanda is today, and so many of the other African countries. Africa is on the path of growth. We have some internal challenges. We must deal with it. That's why we say African solutions for African problems. And the more outside interference that we can get rid of, the better off this continent will be. We are saying we need partners. We do need partners. But partners will come here and partner with us as per the template of Agenda 2063. We have our development template. Don't come and tell us that this is what you want to do in Africa. You come and fall in line with what we have set out for our development. So I think we must constantly stand up, and we say this to BRICS countries as well. We don't want you to come and interfere in the internal affairs of the African continent. Now, most importantly, if BRICS doesn't work for you and I, then we have no business being in BRICS. It must bring value to the life of every South African. And I'm saying that this is happening, and I'm saying that you as students, as academics, there's a tremendous opportunity in all of the BRICS countries. The number of scholarships, capacity building exercise, I'll just give you an example. I was with President Ramaphosa at YW. I was with President Zuma at YW, the headquarters in Shenzhen. Each time I went, because YW's headquarters is here in Johannesburg. That's Africa's headquarters. And you know we are using their 5G network. And there was tremendous pressure from the USA on us to stop using the YW network because it's banned in the USA. Major part of Europe has banned Chinese technology. YW has offered us over 1,000 training slots each time we went there. And these are our people going and getting trained. There's technology transfer, there's capacity building. I'm just using YW as one example. Annually, the Indian government offers us what under the ITEC, International Trade and Economic Cooperation Program, between 70 to 80 slots. And our people are going there. Russia even offers us training in nuclear science. We've got a number of master's students in China and Russia. Now you need to also, through your universities, because we have partnerships between BRICS country universities and our universities, find out what the opportunities are. And there are opportunities. The material benefits, as I've said, even to our farmers, in terms of our agricultural cooperation, in terms of sharing seeds, technology, and so forth. It's happening, it's there. Across the board in all of our sectors, in the health sector, in the agricultural sector, in science, technology, and innovation. There's a great deal happening. We are chairing 200 meetings this year. That's our chairship, 200 meetings. In 2013, when we chaired 50 meetings. By 2018, it had got to over 150. China chaired over 200. This year, we are chairing over 200 meetings. And these are just not meetings where we come and have talk shops. They are substantial in terms of opportunities it provides for us. At this very moment, as we are here, our health track is meeting. Minister Pashla, our health minister, is hosting tomorrow the health ministers. Yesterday and today, the senior officials are meeting. We've had a number of ministerial meetings in Durban over the past several weeks. But it's important for you to also see what is going on. I know that we are partly to blame as government, and that's why we took this opportunity when we were invited to come to the university, because we need to do more to tell our people what is happening in BRICS and what are the opportunities for all of us. On the issue of a BRICS currency, that's not going to happen anytime soon. What the emphasis is on first, deepening trade between ourselves in local currency, which I explained. And I think that's the first step in terms of unhinging ourselves from dollar denomination and becoming financially independent, giving us choices in how we trade with each other, in how we make payment settlement, in how we conduct borrowing. Even our reserve banks, they now start looking at greater gold holdings. Last year, gold reserve holdings rose by 22% because many countries got a scare because of the unilateral sanctions applied on Russia, where the assets are frozen. They don't want to find themselves in the same situation. So they're moving back to gold, they're moving to cryptocurrencies, and that's why you are seeing greater move away from dollar as a reserve currency. It's going to take some time. Remember, before the World War, was the British pound was the global currency that dominated the world. It was replaced by the dollar. At some stage, the dollar will also, you'll have other currencies on the global stage, but it's an evolution. And the evolution starts with changing the political, economic, financial, trading landscape. And I think that's the journey we are on at the present time. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I know we could go on listening to you for the next few hours, but unfortunately, time is always of the essence. And with that, I want us to give a huge round of applause to our audience and to Ambassador. Unfortunately, we're going to have to take some of those questions offline, okay? Thank you so much. I now call upon Ms. Noma Zondo, our Executive Director of Corporate Relations, who's going to move the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, I mean, as our facilitator said, we could go on and on, but unfortunately, we have to end this here. As we conclude this wonderful gathering, let us carry with us the wisdom shared by our guest speaker, Ambassador Sooklal, and the cherished memories that we have for this event. It's been a while since we have such gatherings, and know, as one of our students have mentioned, that this is the type of gatherings that we cherish and that we also want to start to have now that we are back, we are fully back operational wise. So we do have this online as well, but I think it was great to actually have this in person, to actually see all of our students, because we haven't seen you in a while, so it's good to see you all. I would like to, we hope that the knowledge that you gathered today and the connections made will serve as a stepping stone to even greater achievements in the future. Once again, thank you each and every one of you for attending and for being part of this extraordinary event. I must say you've been an amazing audience, and thank you for your participation. So your presence here has made this a significant event, and also has made a difference. We're looking forward to continuing this journey of growth and collaboration together. Once again, I would like to express our gratitude to our Ambassador Sooklal for the insightful and also thought-provoking speech this afternoon. Again, and we would like to give you a big round of applause. And we also like to thank your family for being with us as well this afternoon. I'll also like to thank Professor Sarah Motsetwa for giving us an overview of the event, and we really appreciate you, and we can see that you are flying the UKZN flag high and continue to inspire us. To our staff, students, the media present here, and also representatives from public and private organizations that we have this afternoon. Our RMS for keeping us safe. They were not really trying to stop you, but obviously the activities that happened on campus earlier, so we don't know, maybe they were coming this way, so it was not meant to stop you from coming through, but obviously they had to do our job to make sure that people who are coming through have RSVP. And thank you for your patience while we working that out. So we'd like to thank everyone, our team, from ICS and Corporate Relations, our events and production team for always coming through for us and making sure that this event is a success. Thank you, Shakila, for all the work you've done, you've put in to make sure this is a success. Thank you to our photographers, everyone who's here. I wish you a wonderful day, and hopefully we're gonna see you again in future in these kind of events. Have a lovely day. Thank you. So I'd like to, Prof, just as a token of our appreciation, thank you so much. Yeah. And Prof. Masetwa as well, thank you.
Thank you. I wasn't expecting it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I think there are refreshments outside. Please join us. Thank you.
I should come here more often.
No, you